Well, hello and welcome to the Smells Like Money podcast. Join me, Suzanne Chin Taylor, the DooDoo Diva, as I interview guests who are making an impact on how we manage and operate systems for conveying and treating wastewater. As a veteran of the wastewater, trenchless, and civil infrastructure industry, each week I'll be bringing you industry know-how from industry pros who know how. Join me each week as I speak with representatives of organizations that are utilizing disruptive or new technologies and methods, and executives who are excited to share how to be successful and sustainable in our vital industry. So whether you want to learn about the latest trends in technology, in treatment or trenchless, gain tips on training and retaining great talent, or simply how to be more efficient, productive, or profitable, this podcast is for you. Ready? Let's dive right in. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the DooDoo Divas Smells Like Money podcast. We have the pleasure of continuing our visit today with Sean Merriman from Victory Trenchless of Owings, Maryland. And, last time he was on the show, we talked about startups and accountability in business and just a whole, so many golden nuggets there about, contracting business and making it successful and, future of the industry and getting people involved. And so, people are, one part of it. And today we're going to focus on the technology part of it and where we are headed. And so, CIPP, it's not a new term. It's been around for a long time. Sean's had a lot of experience in it over his, tenure in the industry. And so I wanted to continue the conversation with him about why he has chosen the type of CIPP technology that he's using it at Victory Trenchless and where he sees the market going and the opportunities, the applications for this technology, advancements, and kind of like where we're going. We're going to avoid getting too political here because we know there's been a lot of, kind of like sad reports in the news lately, from, people getting sick and Styrene. So we're not going to go there, but we'll touch a little bit on that because it is worrisome, but that how as an industry, we need to, have that awareness of it. And what are some of the things that we can do to alleviate some of those concerns and maybe even some of those dangers to not just our crews and workers, but the community at large and where the industry needs to go as a whole to keep this viable. And so with that, I know that was a lot of loaded information, but Sean has got a lot of opinions on this and a lot of, knowledge to share, but just kind of want to preface where we're going to go today with this episode. And with that, Sean, the floor is yours.
Man, that's a lot to follow. That's tough. So appreciate you having me on again and continuing the conversation first off. So thank you for that. Yeah, I think there's a lot to unravel, right? There's a lot going on in the industry. There's a lot of conflicting information, I think is probably the right way to say it.
Yes.
The two sides seem to not find middle ground whatsoever in what's going on. And first thing I would say is I came up in the thermal felt industry. That's where my phone is. It's where my history is. It's where I came up in this industry. I have no qualms whatsoever. I think it's a great product. It's very viable. So, my decision to go and do a UV lining has nothing to do with there being issues with that product. I have no concerns. I think that both products have, their own places in the market. And I think they're both very viable. And I think there's, reasons and places and situations to use both. So there's definitely nothing there where I'm the person who's going to come on here and tell you that you shouldn't do steam or felt lining because of styrene or any other issues. But with that said, there is a moving trend or a movement in the market, however you want to say it, of more and more areas, regions, and it's usually localized or regionalized, where markets are moving to UV based on styrene concerns or other concerns. We all know there's a very pungent odor with styrene, and you can smell it at a very low concentration. I personally believe that, quite honestly, you know, while I'm not going to get into whether there are or not health issues, I'm not the person to dive into that, obviously. Um, the odor is really what triggers the fear or the problems, because
Mm.
it's so easy to be smelled. Even if it's at a concentration that, if it is harmful, it could never harm you. The fact that you can smell it such a low concentration, it raises red flags, whether they're just or unjust, right? So that's part of it. So there are a lot of municipalities and things that are moving towards the UV and prefer that. And it's not just, we always want to play on the styrene thing. We want to play UV, UV-GRP, UV cured, and or if it's thermal and felt, right? It's really a styrene abatement issue. It's really about abating the styrene and the styrene odor, right? It's about keeping that odor. And if you keep the odor out, the odor in the VOC, if you keep that out, um, you mitigate the problem. So to me, it's about styrene mitigation. And the answer comes, or the question becomes, how do we mitigate the styrene in the product? And there's several ways of doing it, um, obviously, and some of them are further developed than others. Honestly, UV cured in place right now is probably the most developed and most commercially available and most commercially used of the ways to mitigate the styrene. But there's a lot of new, really, really cool felt lining materials now that are coated with styrene barrier coatings that are super cool. So you can invert it like you always have, you can cure it like you always have, and the styrene can't permeate through the what starts as the outer foil or outer barrier, and then obviously inverts to the inner. So it can't permeate through that. You could pair that up with the styrene barrier pre-liner and effectively encapsulate the styrene, very similar to a UV liner, which is very, very cool, right? So there's multiple ways of doing it. You can also use non-styrinated resins, um, that use a different monomer than styrene in the resin. That comes at a cost. They're not as commercially available. They're not as made in as much mass production, so they're much more expensive. Um, not always as consistent in curing, not as comfortable in using them, different curing schedules. So there's trade-offs, there's pluses and minuses, because there's lots of different ways to do it. But as an industry, I think we're coming to the realization that more and more of us are going to have to embrace this concern and figure out ways to work around it. And, in our instance, try to create a little bit of a niche market out of it, and go and do that work, those clients and those places where that's important to them.
Well, because I know in certain circumstances, especially if you're going to be doing, DOT work or anything where, storm drainage, they're very concerned because of having to do the bypass. They want to make sure that nothing's going to get into the watershed where, like you were saying, certain applications, the UV-GRP lends itself very well, where there's still a market for the the traditional the traditional resin. And it is popular. So when you talk about, I'd like your take on it, and I think you have enough experience, because we didn't mention this, but you had said that you're a graduate, I forget which university, and you said you were a chemistry and environmental science. So but the fact that you've got a chemistry background, I think you're well versed enough to speak on this. You know enough about what's going on under the hood with some of these things from an environmental standpoint and what you've seen. Where do you see the market going as far as the methodology, whether it be the traditional felt and steam or UV, because they're both using power, all right? If we're talking about having a more sustainable or lowering our carbon footprint, are they about equal, or do you see the market heading one direction with cities being more concerned with, embracing these sustainability initiatives? What do you see happening there?
Um, you know, I I haven't put a whole lot of thought into the energy side of it and the carbon footprint side of it, to be quite honest. It's a big thing in Europe. Obviously, in
Right.
Europe, they're ahead of us in that initiative, and there's definitely some differences in their sewer systems and how they're
Right.
were developed, being older. That I know, like in a lot of our the UV technology, that the the equipment, the curing equipment stuff, a lot of it originated from Germany, where they started doing UV curing first. There are some differences in how their systems were built over there versus ours that, cause differences in how we'd like the equipment set up. How much cable reel we want on a cable to cure at a time, because their segments are usually shorter than ours and stuff like that. And there's things they have to deal with idle laws, like how long the vehicles are allowed to idle on site, whether they can use the vehicle to power some equipment. So there's a lot of that stuff that quite honestly, we're behind them on, that will probably follow up in time, and we'll have to figure out in time. But on the material side, you know, I think we're going to see a growing trend, that we're going to see, whether it be UV, GRP, or whether it just be generalized styrene abatement or styrene containment type regulations within our products. I think you're going to see that continue to grow, quite honestly, because the information's out there, right, wrong, or indifferent. It's out there. Studies are out there from both sides. Again, right, wrong, or indifferent, they're out there. Unfortunately, people can Google it, and find it. Not unfortunately. I mean, we're all open to the right the information. I wish we could come to a consensus of what's the truthful information, because it's, like I said, it's very diverse on both sides. So I think that you're going to see more and more municipalities, and even if it doesn't have to do with whether it's harmful or not, just because the odor raises red flags and has people up in arms, I think you're going to see more municipalities, doing politics and political areas that are more urban, areas that are more developed, areas of, I hate to say it, but there's geopolitical kind of undercurrents in this stuff, when you look at the areas and where it's a bigger concern and issue versus where it isn't. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in, and but the way where it goes, then I think we're going to see more places going towards wanting the styrene abatement. Like I said, whether that's UV, GRP, CIPP, or whether that's using some of the new emerging technologies. And I'm sure that, and I know for a fact, there's, the manufacturers are out there developing new ways to abate styrene or to eliminate styrene in those odors. And I think you're going to see it continue to grow. And, obviously, with starting a company in the time that we did, we decided to go on the niche side, and try to fill a void on the UV side, and go that way, and try to help assist and be you know, a, a contracting partner, so to speak, to maybe
Right.
some of the other CIPP firms who have clients who want to do CIPP and want to abate the styrene, and then they're not
Right.
there yet, or unwilling to make that investment yet. So, we're trying to fill that niche and go, be help to them, versus out there directly bidding against them in the felt team markets.
Well, when you're looking at just, CIPP or this methodology of trenchless in general, where do you see, traditionally laterals, obviously, main lines. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on with laterals right now for INI, with taking temporary eminent domain so that things can be done to, which is, I think is fascinating. But where do you see the market going for more applications where this can be utilized, more instances for helping aging infrastructure?
Not necessarily cured in place specific, but there's a ton going on right now with obviously lead service pipe abatement in the water industry.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, to not have to dig it up and replace it, right? If you could find a way to coat it, much like the styrene. Once you cure the liner, the styrene's locked in the laminate and you've kept it home. If you can coat a lead pipe, it completely seal it off. You keep the lead on the outside of the water. So I mean, there's a lot of thought there, and a lot of people working really, really hard on trying to find the golden ticket to rehabilitate those, which I think is immensely important. Water lining, even water main line lining in general, is still a pretty wide open market. There's some technologies out there that I think are really, really cool. There's some engineering design and concerns on the water main lining side that I think need to be understood, and people need to be a little more flexible on, that would make lining of those pipes much more feasible. But that's for people who make those decisions, to make what they're willing to accept and not. But there's some really cool technologies out there that I think serve some really good purposes on the water side that are still emerging, so to speak. You know, laterals, I think as far as on the lining side, I think the technology is really good. I think it's really good. The stuff that's out there is good for I'm sorry, on the sanitary side, on the sewer lateral side is really good. But I think that you're going to see the chemicals and what, the resin and the styrene and those type things continuing to be more scrutinized. And I think you're going to see, I mean, I think it's going to continue unless there is some really definitive science and data that comes out there that completely exonerates styrene of being harmful in any way. That is indisputable and that will completely trump anything that can already out there. So unless that happens, I think you're going to continue to see that scrutiny, and people and clients are going to continue trending slowly. These things don't happen overnight, right? It doesn't, it's not going to flip in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. But over time, I think you'll see more of the styrene abatement in specifications in developed and rural or developed in more urban areas, especially.
Right, right. Well, now, do you also see, I keep seeing, liners getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Used to be, oh, the 8, 12, 24 sewer mains, and now they're getting really trying to expand into that drainage market. I just wanted to get your take on that. Do you see that the manufacturers or technology is really going to focus more on that to be able to do these larger diameter lines, for that to become another method for trenchless repair for DOT applications?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think there's technologies out there that I think are really good, right? And um, we're a cured in place pipe installer. We're more specifically a UV-GRP CIPP installer, and I would say that CIPP is not the right answer for a lot of those pipes. Personal opinion. Other people will disagree with me. They like to go do them. I think there's better technologies out there to do a lot of those really large pipes, say 72s, 84s, 96s. UV obviously has a cap well below that. And personally, you know, my comfort level is probably even a little bit smaller than what the manufacturers would like to say. So there's definitely limitations, but the world changes when a pipe gets big enough that you can man enter it. And when you start talking about a storm pipe that is open-ended on both ends, and the confined space aspect and the ability to get safe oxygen and air flows through them, and how you can work in those pipes, it changes dramatically what you can do. You can start doing spray-in technologies. You can start doing hand applied spiral wound technologies and grouting behind. There's so many things you can do. So, I think the technologies are actually really good, honestly. I think the technologies are there to do it. I think that the municipalities and the clients, probably in the DOT, is just really ramping up understanding what they need to rehab and when. And I think you're going to see more of that work continue happening. But I think the technologies are okay to go do them. It's more of the work that's going to start hitting the market, I think.
Right. Now I just recall, and I don't know if you've run into this, is that, when you were doing lateral reinstatement with UV-GRP, I know that sometimes the cutters that have been on the market just, oh my gosh, it would burn them out. And so a lot of people have been afraid to go that route for fear that, oh, these cutters that I have, I've been doing this for a long time, it's going to die on me after 1 or 2 cuts in. And so where have you seen, in the support technology coming up to speed to help with that? And is that concern anymore like it used to be, or has that kind of been resolved?
A two-part answer. If you're in the mid-Atlantic, it'll burn your cutters up. You don't want to do this technology. Just kidding.
Okay. You went down
No
that
competition.
What do you mean by that?
Well, because then you'd be competing with us, and I'd rather that not be the case. So
Oh,
joking.
okay.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I mean, so you do have to be selective in how you are reinstating taps and how you're doing it. It is much different in UV-GRPP, obviously, our UV-GRP CIPP, man. It is different. So there are precautions you need to take. The cutter strengths, you need to know what you're buying and understanding and what you're cutting. There are cutters out there that are more than capable of cutting it at this point. They've been doing it long enough in Germany and Europe and other places that they developed the cutting technology to be able to do it. Some different bits, some different heads, some cutter heads, and obviously the robots are much more powerful now to do that. And the felt guys, quite honestly, are using a lot of the same robots now because it's faster, stronger, and they like them too. Um, so so that's not as much of a concern. The bigger concern with UV, with GRP liners, whether you know you can cure it either way, but whether however, but with the GRP liner, the bigger concern typically has been finding the laterals. Felt lining, expands much more than glass. So you can get a big dimple to be able to see where you're cutting the lateral. It's a much easier process, much faster to go cut the laterals because you can see them. So that's been a lot of people's hesitancy. There's a lot of municipalities and clients who have been, you know, sold on the idea, so to speak, that UV CIPP installers are going to miss most of the laterals and they're not going to be able to find them and they're going to cut holes all through the liner and have to fix them and this, that, and the other. And, you know, maybe that was true at some point in time, but it's certainly not true today. We've got ways to hit those laterals. There are some UV material or some GRP materials, I should say, out there now that are constructed a little bit differently that actually we're creating and seeing dimples in how we install. So it's much closer to what the felt guys are used to on the lateral, the reinstatement cutting. So, there's a lot going on in that market. It's always kind of been the holy grail, so to speak, for a UV liner is to be able to create dimples in small diameter, and it's it's there. We're seeing it. We're using a material on small diameter pipe right now that we really like a lot and are very comfortable with. And we get dimples and we can go down and find and cut laterals out, much like a felt liner.
Wow. Wow. So, in just wrapping up, where do you see the future of the market? Obviously you started this company. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess because of the age of it, you would consider it still being a, quote unquote startup. And so you obviously, being the smart guy that I know that you are, wouldn't have started this unless you saw there was going to be, long-term viability or money to be made. Where do you see the market going, and where do you see the acceptance of just CIPP, either way that you're going to do it? We talked about these two different technologies, expanding.
Yeah. Um, you know, I think that based on the fact that I think people are to continue to push the styrene initiative and push the concerns about styrene, like I said, founded or not founded. I think there's going to be a continued push to styrene abated materials. And right now I think that UV-GRP is the most sound technology out there in that arena. And so for us, it was about going that route and thinking that that's going to continue to grow. I mean, if I had to pick a number right now, sorry, my dog's in the background. I apologize.
No,
I
it's
think right
okay.
now, uh, you know, if I had to pick a number, I'd say UV is probably maybe 15% of the market share.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I'm just picking a number out of thin air, just a wild guess. And I think that's going to continue to grow. I mean, 15% is a small number. When you look in Europe, it's probably more like 80%.
Wow.
I don't know that I'm not going to sit here and predict that UV is ever going to take over 80% of this market share because we have such an establishment already of felt, felt thermal cure CIPP. But I do think it's going to continue to grab market share. And I think that puts us in a better position to grow and continue to try to grab market share as that market share comes. Um, so I think that there is an opportunity there. Like I said, and again, for us, it was about finding a way to differentiate ourselves, right? We didn't want to come to the market head on with those well-established felt lining companies that we've talked about, as competition, right? We'd rather work with them than against them as much as we can, give them an opportunity to use us on their styrene abated or felt, clients or jobs versus having to walk away from those or having to, decide if they're ready to take the plunge and go into a new technology and make crews learn new things and put the financial investment out there. Maybe it's easier to just contract us to go do that type of work for them. So, there was some thought, well, not some, a lot of thought put
Right.
into that and trying to do things. And, again, my background and the way I look at things, I want to be on the forefront of the technology and what we're doing versus what's always been done. So, I want to start here at UV-GRP and if things progress and infrared curing becomes, a little more viable in GRP liners, then maybe we look at that to get the faster curing or, whatever's next, right? If the spray-in technologies really catch on and those epoxies and different things, maybe we think of that next, right? I want to go to where we're going, not where we've been. That's where the mindset's been.
Oh, I
So
like
again,
that.
love those technologies. I grew up in them and I have nothing against them, but we want to start here and kind of go forward.
I like that. Well, one thing I wanted to ask is that, with your experience with both types, are there certain applications that you see that it's going to be an easier time of it for you to do the rehabilitation utilizing UV versus CIPP? Are there like certain instances where contractors or folks really need to take a closer look at this?
Absolutely. And the same can be said on on the flip side.
Right.
I mean, and that's why I said I think both products are very viable. They're both products that are in the toolbox of the clients, right? But yeah, there's definitely situation scenarios where I think it's a better fit to do, UV curing versus steam and vice versa. I mean, we can get to some projects and we can use mobile, we can make small mobile curing units that you can roll to sites and get into easements or get around a building, say if a manhole's around a building. Um, there's things that, really one of the big differentiators comes in the ability to pull a liner in versus having to have a tower and invert it with steam or hot water. So that makes it easier to do some things. One of the big things in the technology that I fell in love with as well, and I should have said this a while ago with, one of the reasons we went with it, you know, risk factor. I look at UV lining as being much, much less risky from my experience than felt lining or from inverted thermal cure lining. Quite simply, because you pull a liner in, you inflate it, you run a camera down it, you see what the pipe's going to look like cured before it's cured. And as you're curing it back, you're seeing hard pipe as you come. You know immediately if there's an issue. If you were to, and it doesn't happen often, right? But the fact that it could happen is, you invert a liner and the liner broke up and cracked, you think you're gonna be fine, and that pipe breaks and collapses, but you still invert through it, you cure it, harden that liner, you don't know that you have a collapsed liner that's now got to be cut out or the whole line's gonna have to be redug or whatever until it's all said and done, right?
Hmm.
Um, with a UV liner, that's not very likely to happen because you're going to see it before you ever cure it, or you'll see it as you're curing it from the camera as you pull through, and you're going to stop. If it gives you some level of flexibility and comfort there, right? I mean, as a startup company, the biggest fear is that scenario where you've got to dig
Right.
up, a whole entire line that buries a startup. You're done before you ever got off the ground, right? So you mitigate that by doing what we're doing with UV as much as you can. We get calls to line a line where someone built a building over it. It's a one segment, it's under a building. You're like, man, that's a ton of risk, right? How could you ever price a line on a felt side to be comfortable enough to line it where it ends and terminates in the basement of a hospital, right? There's not enough money. Because if that line goes wrong and you're not going to know it goes wrong until it's too late, it's $1 million mistake. So you can mitigate risks like that with a UV liner, right? So those are examples where there's a lot of reason and sense to go to a UV over a felt. And on the flip side, if you've got a 600-foot shot of 84 inch, you set up an on-site wet out and go felt all day long, or things like that, or you've got a 1,200-foot shot of 8 inch through an easement that you cannot. There's no way possible to go set another manhole in. You can invert a long liner and cure it. So there's definitely it goes like I say, it goes both ways when it comes
Right.
down to the very, very niche specific reasons to use one of the liner types over the other.
Hmm. Well, Sean, thank you for your insights on this. It's exciting times to be part of the industry and to see where it's going to go. I mean, it's has no place to go but up, right? And just to
I'm banking on it. I hope so. I hope you're right.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, if we think about 20 years ago, where trenchless was, I don't think many of us ever envisioned that it would be where it is right now.
Yeah.
And be, in a way, a silver bullet for curing our aging infrastructure. And so it's exciting to watch it unfold, and that we're not willing to sit and just rest on our laurels, always looking for better ways to do this and save our communities and save our infrastructure. And so for anybody who would like to connect with Sean, you can find him on LinkedIn, and as well as his company's website, victorytrenchless.com. And I just have to make the comment, because I've said this to you before, I absolutely love your logo. And just
thank you.
How did you come up with the name Victory Trenchless? What is behind that? Because I think that's just kind of interesting. Oh, okay. There you go.
Oh yeah. So when I was coming up with the name, I'm a Virginia. I grew up in Virginia. I went to Virginia Tech. So I think I told you in our previous session, I've been brainstorming my own company for 6, 8, 10 years. I mean, Virginia Trenchless for Virginia Tech. And then obviously now that we're in Maryland and moved out here and we started the business in Maryland, I had to come up with something else with a V. So we came up with Victory for Victory Trenchless, and obviously it's a stylized logo that has a VT, but is not infringing on the copyright of the Virginia Tech Hokies. But yeah, no, it's very shamelessly Victory Trenchless for VT, because I'm a tried and true through and through Virginia Tech Hokie.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that little inside story. And thank you for joining us in this week's episode. And until next time, keep it flowing. Thanks so much for joining me, the DooDoo Diva, on this week's episode of Smells Like Money. What stood out to you this week? Share your takeaways by leaving me a review. You can find out more about the new technologies, creating sustainable solutions, and insights on how to succeed in our vital industry by subscribing to the show. Whether you want to learn about the latest trends in wastewater infrastructure, treatment, or trenchless, you've got it all right here at Smells Like Money. If you're an industry expert and would like to be considered as a guest for the show, book a quick chat with me by visiting calendly.com/the2it group/B-A-podcast-guest, or simply click the link in the show notes below. Until next week, a big shout out to all my industry friends and those who will be. You are my superheroes. Thanks for tuning in, keeping it flowing, and we'll see you all next week.